Hey there, I'm Marius. I'm the guy who wrote Kia, and as you can see, right now we have just released Kia 3.0, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about it. So if you haven't already, go check out the new Kia docs, read the blog post on 3.0, and let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is just to install Kia, and to do that I'm going to use this shortcut, which is the create React app template. This will get us going quickly, so we can actually start playing with the app itself. I'm gonna call this tutorial 1, hit go, and hit pause, and we'll be back in a second. And we're done. So it took a while, but we're here. So cd tutorial 1, gonna open it in VS Code, so that we can play around with it. And that's it. So the first thing I want to do is just type yarn start to actually see what we have now. And when I run that, we should open a little page here, an example app with a little bit of a form. But I don't really want any of that right now, so I'm just gonna go and clean it all up by just removing this demo form. And we have a empty canvas that we can start from. So to show you what Kia can do, I am just going to create a new simple component here. Because I'm not very creative, I'm gonna just call it simple. Let's make a new file. And let's put this back here. So, oops, there we go. Now we have a little simple component. What do we need to do? Just in case, let's add that. All right, so time to show Kia. So what is Kia? Kia is actually a state management solution for React, and it's somewhat similar to other state management solutions you've seen, but it's also very different. In terms of history, Kia is based on Redux, so if you know about actions, reducers, selectors, you will feel right at home, but Kia just expands those concepts a lot more and gives you a very nice API to wrap those around. So let's get started. So in Kia, you put everything inside a Kia call. And inside this call, you pass Kia an array. And you saw that something just happened. I just typed in Kia and automatically all of this stuff was added. So this is thanks to what we have here called Kia TypeGen, which is a special piece of software that just runs around, finds every logic, and then just generates a type for it, depending on what we actually want inside the logic. So to create a logic, you just have this array, and you pass into the array what we call logic builders. And each logic builder is just something like actions. Oops. Just import it from Kia. Let's call it increment. And now suddenly we have a logic. In the simple logic type, you can see we have an action called increment. And we can fetch it here. But just incrementing on its own is not very useful. So let's add a few more things. And let's add a button here as well. Let's add one more called increment, because why not? So this already shows you the basic idea of how Kia is supposed to work. You have two separate sides. You have the logic, and then you have the component. And it works. The only thing you do in the component is use two hooks from Kia, either use actions or use values. But at this moment we don't yet have a value, so let's add one. The way you get values is you use either loaders or reducers or any of the other plugins that Kia provides. In this case, since we want to keep things really simple, and this is the first tutorial after all, we're just gonna add a reducer to show the core features. And let's call the reducer a counter. Give it a default of a 0 and make it so that each time we increment, and as you can see there's quite a lot of auto completion everywhere. It's all very nice. There we go. So we have a little logic that has two actions, increment and decrement. And we have one reducer called counter, which is the place that stores the value. And so if we're now gonna look here, see that counter is already available. And this is the simplest example I can give you. So what have we done here? We have created a logic, which is the separate container that stores your state. We have connected it to React through two hooks. And inside the logic, we have used a bunch of logic builders to give the logic different features. Path is one that's added automatically if you're running Kia TypeGen. And this is something that you don't really need, but it's useful for debugging. It just helps give you better error messages. You could also just like completely omit it and everything will just work the same way. It's not that in Kia things are linked together through static strings or anything like that. It's just here to help you with debugging. The other thing we did is onto this logic we added two actions, and they're simple actions. They don't take any parameters. And then a counter, which is a reducer, which has a default at 0, and which is incremented and decremented according to these functions. So, and this gives us a very nice little counting thingy. Not very useful, but enough to show you how the framework itself works. Alright, let's make it a little bit more complex and add also side effects to show you the full picture. So for side effects, we have listeners, and these work similarly. Oh no, this is from the wrong place. And now if we open the console here, every time we add a number, we see that we have added a number, which is, well, interesting. So what else can we do to make this more exciting? First up, listeners have a special feature here called breakpoints. And so the second argument passed to any listener is a breakpoint. And what this lets you do is, let's do a wait breakpoint and give it a second. And now let's type. So if we click the negative button, nothing really happens. But if we click the positive button, I might need to reload. Oh no, I didn't. So we add a number, we wait a second, and we get two messages. However, breakpoints have this wonderful trick up their sleeve, which is that if this action is called again while the listener was waiting, it will just stop execution here. For example, let's click it a bunch of times, and we only get this once. This is really useful if you're making API requests and you want to, for example, make a bunch of them in a row and only get the last value and discard the result of the first ones, or other cases like this. And there you have it. These are the simple core features of Kia. But I guess as an introduction to Kia, this is sort of underwhelming. So let's have another one. Let's make a... let's do two more things. First, let's make this counter increment every second, because why not? And to do that, we actually need to use the browser's tools, set timeout precisely. And what's the best way to do it? Let's use aftermount. And here we have access to a few more things. So Kia always has the syntax where this is an action, this is a reducer, this is a listener, but you can always pass here either an object describing the properties you want, or you can make it into a function, and then the function gets as its first parameter the logic itself, so you can get all the actions, listeners, values, all the other things from it. In this case, we don't really need anything within the listener, so it's good to start with a simple object, but in aftermount we actually want access to the actions. And so here we're gonna have a little thing called cache interval window set interval. Let's do actions.increment and every 1,000 seconds, 1,000 milliseconds. In a similar way, let's just do window clear interval. Go up. Okay, that's going maybe a bit too fast. Yeah, okay, after a reload, it's going all well now. So yeah, that's a simple example of Kia. Here we used actions, reducers, listeners, and so whenever the simple logic is created, nothing really happens, but whenever React requests it, the first time we will mount it, and that means adding it to Redux, connecting all the values and whatnot, and you can hook up into that lifecycle using the aftermount effect. Alright, let's make one more demo, and let's call this now login form. And so we are gonna make a simple login form, and we're gonna add it here. See, yeah, it shows up. And let's get rid of the counter for now, because we don't really want it. So, forms. Forms are something that a lot of web frameworks struggle with, but not Kia. In Kia, forms are pretty much a core feature, in the sense that we have a core plugin called Kia Forms that offers support for them. And if you go here, you can get all the documentation on how it works, but just to show you, I'm gonna make a quick demo. Let's just have a logic called it login logic, and if I no, I want an object here, and let's add something called forms from Kia Forms. And now suddenly if we let's call it also login form. And if we look inside, we'll see that suddenly this logic, just after we created a form, contains a huge amount of different functions, like actions, and also a bunch of different values. And so what is this? So this is actually the magic of Kia. This forms function just calls this function. And this is the magic of logic builders. It just calls another bunch of actions that just add a different set of values to your logic depending on what kind of input you give the form. And using this, you can build all sorts of really crazy abstractions and really practical abstractions. You can take code that you find repeating in your state management and just move it into a logic builder and have it just do what it does. A logic builder is actually nothing more than just a function that takes a logic and then just does stuff to it. This will obviously fail now, but that's pretty much it. And so all the different forms or inside here, actions, listeners, they're nothing more than just simple functions that return a logic, return a function that takes a logic and then just add stuff to it, and that's it. And we can always combine all of this. So we just take actions, just pass it the logic, and this this login logic is now going to have a new action called new action that we can call. The typing won't really work like this because we are using Kia typegen, and each of these forms has and other logics have their own type builder as well that does pretty much the same, but that's a bit out of the scope now. We're gonna go back to forms. And so what is a form? We have now here a login form, and let's close this. It doesn't really do much on its own, so let's actually make it do something. The first things we want are to actually, well, show the form fields. For that we have a form tag to whom we just give logic equals login logic, and form key equals login form, and we're also gonna say enable form on submit. And now if we hit submit, nothing happens. Ah, there you go. It's submitting the form. And if we add the values, you can see it's just giving us the user and password value. Now, a few more things that we want to do. First, we want to have some, well, actually the fields for the username and password. So for that, we have a field tag. And inside the field, just gonna put an input. And we already have the username field. And it just works. And we're gonna do the same for the password. And there we go. We actually have a form with two fields. Let's add some validation as well. Let's see. And there we go. The styling is obviously broken because we haven't done anything with it, but we do have a proper form. Without entering a password, it's not going to submit. And there we go. This also gets a breakpoint, so if we do want to simulate some delays, let's also make it wait a second. And in a similar way, it will only get the last one because of breakpoints. So this is all great, but why do you actually have the chance to submit multiple times? So to get around that, let's take a value here called is login form submitting, and just disable this button for submitting. And there you go, we have created a little form. Ain't that simple? And yeah, you can have all sorts of different actions in the form, you can change the values, you can also get the form values inside here if you want them, it helps. So now we have developed quite a nice little application that has two little scenes. We have the simple scene and the form scene, but it's kind of cramped to have both of them on the page at the same time. So the next and the final thing we're gonna do in this little tutorial is to convert this to use routes and scenes. And so what do we have? We have two scenes, simple and login form. So let's call them, just call them like this. And we're gonna want to actually create a URL based routing system, and we're gonna create it now in the next 5 minutes, and it's gonna look amazing. So what we need for this is just need a thing called a scene logic, and we actually also need so we have login form, there we go. So we have now two scenes, and we want something that kind of toggles those depending on which scene is selected. So how do we do that? Well, obviously we're gonna make a new logic here. Just gonna have an action called set scene. So this is the first time we're using something a little bit broken. Scene is not assignable. Oh. So this is the first time we're actually using a action that has a payload, and how this works is that the set scene, which we're just creating as a simple action here, is gonna take the scene as an argument and return an object that has a key scene. This object we're gonna directly use in the reducers. We're just gonna call it scene. As a default, let's give it the login form, and let's make sure that this value is typed as a scene. And then what actions do we have? So set scene. And for whatever reason, it doesn't want to add the type. Why is that? Let's just reload it. Yeah, there we go. So it kind of crashed when I made the new file. So now this logic there's a scene, and if I just print it out, it's gonna say login. So that's the default scene. Now, how do we flip between these two? So there are two options. We could make some kind of a old school system like this, and I think it's gonna work. We're now in the login form. But this is not very optimal because we have something in Kia that can help here, which is called the selector. And let's just call it component. And there we go. You can just import the component directly. So selectors are like computed properties, where this is the input. So currently we just take the reducer as an input and we just pass in the component. Alright, that's all wonderful, but what if we want to switch the scenes? So let's just create a quick menu. And it's gonna be a very dirty component, but I don't care. There we go. And we have a little router. We can switch between scenes. Ain't that nice? Let's add a bit of space. And let's also add some color. Let's call this... let's just call it S. I'm lazy. I have also in the key. And there we go, we have a little router. Now, one more thing is missing, which is that the router itself is not very useful if it's not connected to a URL. So let's take the final piece of the puzzle and add a thing here called Kia router, which gives us two functions. One of them is called action to URL. So whenever a scene is set, let's just change to this URL. So as you can see, it changes the URL. And so if we have an action to URL, obviously we also have a URL to action. Here we need to destructure it a little bit. And so what's going to be the URL? Just like this. And so actions.set scene. Just cast it. It's going to be given as a string. And just in case, let's do if values.scene is not seen. There we go. And so what happens now? Can go back and forth and it all just works magically. We still have the root URL. That's not really optimal. So here we're just gonna do router actions push. And now whenever we open the app, we're just gonna go to the login page initially. Can do what we want here. This is always gonna increment. You can also see that if we unmount a component, so this simple, we move away to the login screen and move back, the counter will have restarted. So that's because, yeah, this entire logic is just like removed from your application when this component unmounts. You can keep it around if you want, but this is just the default behavior. And yeah, there you have it. In about 30 minutes, we created a simple application showing you the basics of Kia and showing you a few extra functions, like all the form system here, all the URL handling. You managed to see what are breakpoints, which are cool little things that help you avoid out of order requests and just act as a debouncing system. We have the form, you saw how Kia Forms works. And yeah, and as a side effect of all of this, we also have this. You can make the bird spin fast. So yeah, that's it. That's Kia. If you want to learn more, go to the documentation and read around and just ask. I'm usually very active inside all sorts of various forums, so send your questions and I will be happy to help you further.